Hello, YouTubes. Christ is in our midst. I hope y'all are well on the YouTubes. It's a crazy time. Yeah. But things are kind of normal here in Hartwell, Georgia. You can see the progress back there, right? Our coop is coming along. That's going to be the perimeter, right? And then inside there will be the actual chicken coop. And we're going to plant mint and citronella and lavender around it. And then we're going to build chicken tractors and let our chickens play out in the yard in the chicken tractors during the day and stuff. It's just going to be great fun. Oh, I didn't clean up from my construction there. Yeah, but Hartwell is pretty far removed from all the stuff that we're seeing on the news and social media. So that's my experience of it, is through y'all. Both with the coronavirus, I'm affected by the lockdown, but it hasn't hit this community so much because it's a rural community, right? And also the violence hasn't hit here as well. Of course, everyone's heart is broken. That's because we share that as Americans, right? We share that as human beings. So that's where I'm living. Let's see. Oh, there's my dog back there. Yeah, I think he'd be laying down because we went for a longer run this morning than We went for a longer plod this morning than usual. So he was kind of tired afterwards. But no, see, he's still got energy, plenty of energy. Maybe he'll talk with us in a minute. Anyways, enough silliness. We have serious things to talk about. We're going to bring on Father Gregory Jensen in just a minute. And y'all know Father Gregory, if you've been paying attention to any of my podcasts or this live stream or just, on social media and stuff. He's an author, and when you write a book, so an author, that means that he's got determination, basically, right? He's also got a PhD, another sign of determination. He can set a goal and actually follow through on it, unlike certain people who can come up with the goal and don't follow through so well. So we know that about him. But the neat thing is that what he has become a philosopher on, he's got a PhD, right? And what he has written on is of great use to us. It's, he studied spiritual formation. So it's not just psychology. It's like applied psychology for salvation. It's pretty awesome. It's like, really? You can get a degree in that? I thought... so very nice. And his book, the book that I know, he's written other things too, you can Google him, but is on consumerism, right? This was the thing in normal times that we worry about in our culture. is the effect of consumerism, right? See, Bo agrees. And it really does undermine our soul, right? And make us less. Yeah, so I think we're coming back on here, and got to pull Father Gregory back up. So let's see here, what's going on? And it's all very interesting, so it's hard to know what you can see and what you can't. Let's see. Calling Father Gregory now. When you're in the army and you're approaching the lines and you give the word and you wait for the response.
Oh, there we go.
Excellent. Christ is in our midst.
It is and never shall be. I assume we're talking to each other now.
We are.
Oh, there you are.
And we've got the audience back. It's hard to know what that was all about. But my computer just restarted itself.
It's you have a Windows computer?
No.
Do you have Windows?
No.
Or Mac?
Mac. Yeah, and I have a Mac computer that is you know, the planned obsolescence of computers is really frustrating. So you're not supposed to be able to upgrade this kind of computer on your own, and I did, and that
Okay.
for most things that keeps it going pretty well, like the stats that I have to do and stuff. But
Yeah.
this sort of thing pushes it and our internet access to the limit. But with the internet access, even here in Hartwell, Georgia, they just ran what's it called? Fiber optic cables.
Mhm.
So soon we'll be able to upgrade, and this will have less of a problem with latency and things like that. And that'll be nice.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah, thank God.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
this is what a healthy economy does. It it responds to the needs of people. So, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Actually, I'd say it responds to the needs of individuals, but I take your point.
Yes, of individuals. Very good.
So.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, so let's start with that, right? Because one of the big questions: who are you, Father Gregory? Who are you?
Oh well. It really depends on who's asking when.
So you
You
don't
know.
know who you
I
are.
can.
You're
Well,
completely defined by context.
Nope. Nope. The answer is defined by context.
Ah, yes.
So. Yeah. So. No. No. But I know a lot of stuff about myself, but there's a lot of stuff I don't know. Um, if it's every once in a while I'll be preaching on Sunday morning, and I generally don't listen to myself when I preach because it's better that way. But every once in a while something will come out of my mouth, and I'll think to myself, "Well, who said that? Well, it must have been me." But yeah, but, that question of identity is always a hard one to answer.
It is,
Um,
right? It is, but it's the big question that we put to everybody now. I mean, I watch my teenagers. That's what they're struggling with. Who am I, right? I'm like, oh, guys, I love you. I love you. That's who you are. You're in love. You know, and there's some anxiety attached to it for them, right? Because part
yeah.
of an identity is, are they accepted? Are we going to accept them? And
Hmm.
are the people at school going to accept them? Are the people at church going to accept them? And so they try on these different things, and it's
Yeah.
always been that way. I mean, that's part of what we're going through in our teenage development, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Actually, I just got a journal announcement
Yeah.
and a request for an article from a friend of mine who's a psychologist in Germany. He says, "Hey, do you want to write something on basic trust?" It's like, okay, sure, why not? Because I wish I could tell you I was. Oh, we've lost you. There you go. Yeah, my scholarship tends to be rather ad hoc. Um, for a long time, I tried to get published in referee journals, and I realized that this is utterly pointless. And then I discovered the world of basically writing on spec or writing on request, and I realized, gosh, this makes my life a lot easier. Uh, they tell me what they want. They tell me how long it needs to be. I turn it out. Um, and
And usually there's a built-in audience as opposed
and,
to
and
scholarly journals, which may not get any play.
well, and that's it. I mean, when I was a more active blogger, I realized that more people read my blog in about a month than probably read St. Vladimir's Theological Journal or the Holy Cross Theological Journal. You know, not making a comment on content, but
No, it's all out there
yeah,
now. And you can, those numbers, if you go to scholar.google.com, you can look up and you can see how often things are cited. That's kind of
right,
the metric for figuring out how much play something gets. And they don't
right,
they don't give that for your blog. There you have the metrics from your website trafficking to
right.
it. But with scholarly articles, that's where it goes. Yeah, and
Well, that's it. I mean, citations.
hmm
Um, even that sort of exists in a fairly narrow world.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way to get
But
cited, it's so much of it is dependent on your network. Yeah. So
well, yeah,
um, all it and if you're not if you stand out at all, like this is just inside baseball, right? But in the '90s, I was a comparative politics, and I was writing on political parties, comparative political parties, and got a couple of things published, right, in refereed journals. One in a fairly high-ranked journal, and that was cool. So, and at that time I was young, right? This was a while back, nice. Um, there was a well-established political scientist, of course, in the department who that was his topic. He had been doing democratization, but now he was doing more party stuff. So he was doing this, these books on comparative political parties, and not only, so if he were my mentor, he would maybe invite me to do a spec article or something for it, right?
yeah,
If he, respected me, he would have cited me, you know.
right.
No, no. He, we clashed early on, and he did not respect me. He did not respect the work I was doing. And so, he labeled me a certain way, and nothing that and so, I mean, I know what you're saying, right? Academia
Yeah,
is
yeah,
just, it's bizarre. And it's gotten worse. It's gotten worse since
yeah.
then.
I think it has. It's interesting. I mean, it largely follows the same dynamics that you would see in any market. Um, you know, but but it's I think it's one very small market for scholarship. Um, I excuse me, allergies. It just we've gotten a lot of rain here, so everything is growing. But because my parish is on a university campus, um, university life is sort of part of what I do as a priest. But of course, I'm not teaching at the university. You know I'm a tolerated visitor, and I think not always that tolerated. But um, I think academia has become increasingly abstract. Um, and I mean, it's always been. I mean, I think since the Enlightenment, there's been a strong, especially out of the European Enlightenment, a strong emphasis towards abstraction. But now, um, people write things which have almost no connection to reality. I sent you a couple of articles that were published through the University of Wisconsin's Russian Studies program, and it's on Pussy Riot and their protest at the Christ the Savior Cathedral, and you read it, and if you know anything about the Orthodox Church, you would be hard pressed to recognize um, Orthodox Christianity in the article, even though that's a major pull of the author of the argument that the authors are making, and it's all sort of been processed through a sort of a quasi-Marxist dialectic or rhetoric, um, and yeah, it's bizarre. But what makes that worrisome is that more and more of our priests, more and more young men are coming to the seminary from university backgrounds, and they've sort of imbibed deeply on that that sort of philosophy of abstraction. And we tend to think, oh, that's a problem because they're liberal. And it's not. The problem is not whether they're liberal or conservative. It's whether or not they can think concretely, prudentially. And I think more and more, and we talked about this last time, clergy are taking on the roles of pundits and making these big, overarching, sweeping statements that, as they say, play to the base. And we see that in academia as well, playing to the base.
Right. Yeah. And
So,
here's a funny thing that happens in academia, and we'll get out of the academia talk because we're the only two people right now here that are
who care?
interested in this. But in academia,
they're
so
stuck with us.
at least in social science, there is a method, right? And it's a reasonable method, right?
Yeah.
So you don't trust individual discernment. So there's a way that you set up your hypotheses. There's a way you gather data. There's a way you analyze your data, and then there's a way that you submit it to public scrutiny, right? And out of all this is supposed to come some kind of discernment about, as you point out, about smaller and smaller and less interesting things. So that's what goes on over here when you're trying to publish. But then what you see, that nobody reads those things. Nobody reads those journals, right? The effect of academics is on the culture through the teaching, and now through the Twitterati and social media. And there they have a tremendous effect, but without the restraint, without the problem, without recognizing the problem of discernment. Instead, what they use is their authority. And sorry, you haven't earned wisdom by getting a PhD. You just haven't. You've learned a method, and within that method and your area of expertise, I will look at how you did it and judge your results. But you cannot speak off the cuff with any degree of certainty. That's the point of the method. But what you get on Twitter and social media and blogs is, I'm a PhD, I study this, and here is the truth.
Yeah. Well, and this, this is sort of an epistemological problem.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not to become overly theoretical, but science, whether we're talking natural sciences or social sciences, doesn't offer a certitude. It offers us statements within degrees of probability. Things which are more or less likely true under specific conditions. And then that's certainly fine. That has its own kind of value. The problem is that I think a lot of times people take that enters in sort of into the broader culture, and it gets picked up as if statements of probability were statements of certitude. And we saw this, I think, with a lot of the rhetoric that was coming out at the beginning of the pandemic. We were hearing people will follow the science. Well, all right, if you're a scientist, or in my case, I spent a lot of my doctoral program required that I spend a lot of time reading philosophy of science. If you follow the science, the first thing you realize is that the science doesn't actually tell you what to do. And it can't, because what to do is a moral question, and science is not concerned with determining what is morally good from what is morally evil. But it's in the nature of science that it's always under constant revision. So when the pandemic started, I think Nicholas Taleb, the risk analyst, I think came up with a very good response. We do not know, but there is at least a possibility that this illness, this disease, could have a devastating effect on the population. So and we talked about it last time, under conditions of uncertainty, the most conservative, or if you prefer, the most draconian response is probably the most reasonable, because you can't have an economy if everyone's dead, or if you've lost a significant percentage of your population. But that's based on data which is always subject to revision. But our political leaders, again, on the left or the right, spoke with great certitude And it's like, but the data doesn't support that kind of certitude. No matter how probable, it's never certain. And then I think what happens is we end up overselling the data.
Yeah.
And people are then undermined. They're worried when the data is correct. It's like, well, you didn't know what you were talking about. Well, yes, we did, but we're revising it as we go along.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing. We're revising it, and of course, the finger pointing is ridiculous. You know, we are where we are, right?
Well, yeah. And I find that in my own parish. I mean, I have scientists. I think most everyone in my parish has gone to college, has a bachelor's degree or more, but they come from a sort of a wide range of sort of political and cultural backgrounds, and it's always very difficult, at least to sort of to balance the different perspectives in the parish. Some people are really comfortable with science, others find science to be sort of they're dubious about science, and so you want to make sure that when you're having a conversation, you take into account the person with whom you are speaking, and understand that an argument that works for one person is not going to work for another person. If you think wearing masks at liturgy is an offense against your liberty, then my trotting out the scientific data is simply going to sound like I'm hitting you over the head with a stick. On the other hand, if it's just about data, then my appeals to your liberty or conscience seems extraneous and really soft pedaling the issue, because of course it's about the data, not personal decision.
So how do we avoid becoming sophists in the middle of all this?
I often think of myself as a sophist.
Okay.
I not in a good way.
Yeah.
It's like, but because I can only speak for myself, but I often find myself having to respond to individuals with concrete concerns at the moment, and it is difficult. I think over the course of, say, a dozen conversations in 2 weeks, to maintain a consistent response, just because I'm being asked similar but different questions. Mm-hmm. And so so I'm always a little worried. It's like, am I just saying what people want to hear?
As opposed to saying what people you believe will help people, that they kind of need to hear, if we can be so presumptuous.
Well, but even then, I mean, I think even if we tell people what they need to hear, some people need to hear, a clearly articulated appeal to the data. Some people need to hear, a moral argument. Some people need to hear, well, it's for the sake of the children. More of a sentimental argument. So, what we're trying to do is not just change behavior, but change hearts, move souls. And to go back to Aristotle, we shouldn't expect from a discipline or science, as I said, more precision than its object allows for.
Okay, right. So that's a great segue. Okay, so we're pastors, right? We're not politicians. We're not there to be scientists. We're there to lead people away from danger into salvation, right? That's through Christ. We're there to preach Christ crucified, however you want to put it, right? So there are huge. If I wanted to play to the crowd, right? We know how. We know how, and there are priests and there are bishops who do this. They'll see something like this and they'll say, yeah, the internet unfortunately makes all these things available, right? You'll have some obscure bishop somewhere in Western Timbuktu,
Everywhere.
right? And comes out and says, this is just a, Masonic Bilderberger conspiracy, right? This whole coronavirus, it's designed for X, Y, and Z, and you're like, oh, no. How long am I going to have to clean up after this, right?
Well, I figure somewhere out there, there's a kid in junior high who's going to have to clean up after me when he's a priest.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
you know, I I'll tell the story frequently, like in the airport, or in the community. People will sometimes buy my coffee, but on more than one occasion, I've been in a public restroom and someone has urinated on my foot, and in both cases, they did it for the same reason. I'm a priest. So if I take the coffee,
Okay.
I got to accept the other part of it. I mean, that's. So yeah, your mic is off. There you go.
Yeah, I
So
do
you
that.
okay?
Yeah, I do that to share bandwidth a little better. Yeah, right, right. So one of the things that we're
But
preparing for is bringing everybody back together. And
yeah,
people haven't been together. Their experience of these two crises, or three crises, I'm willing to say. First the crisis of the coronavirus and the experience of the lockdown, right? And
right.
people's response to that is tribal and also psychological, like which varies
Yeah,
across individuals. And then we have the image of this man being just dying
George
before our
Floyd.
eyes, George Floyd being
Yeah,
killed right there, right? And so there's our response to that, and that's, oh man,
yeah,
everybody experiences that. And then we have the reaction to protests, the reaction because I'm going to lump them together, not because they're the same phenomenon, but they're happening at the same time. The protests, which then some people are
mhm,
using for rioting, right?
right.
And so those are the new images. So we've got these three things, boom, 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 right? And as a pastor, so if I had time to deal with each one at a time, I could, preach Christ crucified so that they come through this healing stronger.
Yeah,
But when you look at the way that these three things line up in people's minds and their experience, I just so here's where I'm at. And I want your advice.
yeah,
I can't do the math here. I've got to go back to basics and really just literally preach Christ crucified and resurrected
yeah.
for our salvation.
Well, I agree. I think one of the things, I think one of the realities that we sort of we have to accept, though not necessarily happily, is we need to expect that as a result of the last several months, we're simply going to have people walk away from the church. Um, and I think I don't want that. I'll do what I can to prevent that. I think we should all do what we can to prevent that. Not only the clergy, but the bishops and the laity. But for some people, the events of the last several months, and then the coming months, is just going to be a test of their faith, and whether they lose their faith or they're so beaten down that they just step away because everything is too raw. I mean, this is something that's we have to acknowledge is going to it's a possibility, and I think it's a likelihood. And part of it, I think, is a lot of the rhetoric that we've seen in social media that turns everything into, again, from both sides, a test of not just faith but integrity. So we've heard in the secular realm, if it's about lives, not the economy, but the economy is about lives. And we've heard in the church, it's like, well, if you restrict who's attending liturgy on Sunday, obviously it's because you have bad faith. But of course, if you go to liturgy and you want to have the church full, it's because you're a fundamentalist and you have bad faith. So I got to tell you, we a lot of this I think we're doing to ourselves, and that needs to stop. And it needs to stop now, because there is going to come a tipping point where things will just begin, as they tend to do in social phenomena. They're going to start spiraling out of control of the individual. So that's the first thing. People will just walk away, and they will walk away for a variety of reasons. But one of them is how these issues have become polarized within the context of the church. Go ahead. Did you have?
Yeah. So, and keep your other points in mind, please.
Yeah.
So we should construct lessons learned, right? Lord willing, we won't go
What do you
through
mean?
coronavirus. We won't go through these exact same things again. But if I have had an effect, and I, as a representative of the clergy, representative of the church, have had an effect on people's faith because of my behavior on, in this case, social
Right.
media, what's the lesson learned there? What can we teach in seminary so that when the people who take our place, when they're in similar circumstances, we can have them ready and say, look, you're going to be tempted to do this, and you'll think it's good,
Right.
but here are the unintended consequences.
Right.
What is my behavior? What are the behaviors that I'm doing that are being that stumbling block to people during the coronavirus, during the during the murder, during the reaction to it?
Yeah. And then I want to go back to what I said a moment ago. This is an experience that I've been having. The fact of the matter is that some behavior that will chase people away will be a source of, has the potential of being a source of comfort, or at least affirmation for others. I'm reading a book by Vernon Smith, the Nobel Prize laureate in economics, called Humanomics. And he makes a point that, especially in English-speaking countries, we tend now to talk in terms of right and wrong. And he said, the older moral language is good and evil. And he says the thing about the language of right and wrong is, especially when we talk about something as wrong, it may or may not be sinful, but it's always irrational. 2 + 2 = 5 is simply it's wrong. It's irrational. And if you listen to a lot of the rhetoric, and I suspect this will show up in Sunday's sermon, because it's Pentecost, it's just wrong to vote for a Democrat. It's just wrong to vote for a Republican. There is no rational reason to support President Trump, and obviously there is no rational reason to vote for Joe Biden. So I think one of the first things that we need to do is dial back that rhetoric of right and wrong, because we fall into the trap of assuming the person with whom we are speaking is irrational.
Okay, so all I need to change my language so I can say that voting for President Trump is evil, voting for Senator Biden is evil? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, not at all. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, Mad City. Where the political divide is not between liberals and conservatives, but between liberals and progressives. It's left and further left. But I do think we need to be very hesitant about positing motives, and especially malicious motives. And that's the next step. The person with whom I'm disagreeing is not irrational, and that disagreement is not evidence of malicious intent either. So those are similar but different order kinds of conversations. There are, very good reasons to vote for President Trump, and there are very good reasons to vote for Vice President Biden. And I mean, that's just
Right.
that's just the reality.
And we're not doing that, right? So that instinct
Well,
of
I am.
charity, you are, right. And that's what we
Yeah,
do as pastors. This is how we're
yeah,
built. We look for the good in people, and we help cultivate that and help other people see it.
yeah.
That's supposed to be our instinct, right? And this, because you're our expert on ethics and morality. This is one of the hardest things for me to understand is when I'm reading somebody like Saint Dionysius, and he writes that there is no such thing as evil.
Right.
That even if you pick out the worst example, and the worst example
Hmm.
that he gives is Lucifer, the fallen leader of the angels, right? And he says
Right.
even there, it's a deficiency of good. It's not evil, and then he
Right.
forces you intellectually first, and hopefully into your heart, to see that there is no ontology of evil, right?
No.
That there is only an ontology of good and lesser, right? So if I can get that, and hopefully using we can't make people read Saint Dionysius because it's just it's beautiful. I love it,
Yeah.
but
Saint
it's tough.
Dionysius is why I never needed to do drugs. It's just like, really? What do you got? I mean, honestly, this is wild stuff. But it is. All kidding aside, he is challenging.
Right. So
So,
how?
but
But this is the whole deal of it's, and our Lord tries to get at it from so many directions.
well, and
And
yeah,
so it's really important, right? This idea of loving your enemy, this idea of seeing
yeah.
Christ in the stranger, all of this, it's trying to get us not just to change our behavior, but to change our hearts so our behavior changes. And
Well,
this reading
yeah.
of intention, this reading, I can read your mind. That's basically what we're saying. We're not saying it out loud because we skipped that step. Because if we recognized that was part of a step in our logic, we'd be like, no, I can't read minds. But no, I can read minds because I know you're bad.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And this is why I rather like the older moral language that Smith refers to, because it does have a role for intention, what I wanted to do, but it does so in an orderly fashion. Um, Fornication is a sin. It is always and everywhere a sin. The intention of the actors can mitigate culpability. Um, they may be youthful and have been carried away by, as we say, ardor or affection, or um, I'll tell undergraduates, it's like, the first time you get hungover, it's not a sin. It's a sin, but you're not guilty of a sin because you didn't know what your limits were. So, and the second time you get hungover, you're not guilty of a sin because you imagine you can't ever hurt as much as you did the first time. So the first time was ignorance. The second time was misplaced hope. However, if you come to me hungover the third time, we have to have a conversation. Because now you know your limits and you know the possibilities. So that older language built in the option of talking about how my intention, what was in my heart, could mitigate, lessen my culpability, lessen my guilt. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, we don't generally talk like that, and we certainly, forgive me, I don't see that we necessarily train our priests in that way. Um, I mean, I think we talk a great deal about ethics, which tends to be somewhat more theoretical, more abstract. But this, I think, is just pouring fuel on the fire. Yeah.
Right. And this is the kind of thing that I would imagine in a well-structured community that we would learn naturally in relationship with elders, with wise elders, with our confessors, and so on. They would take us through this. They would help us understand ourselves, our relationship to sin, our relationship, how intent drives it, how culpability varies, right? But we're not in that space. We're in the space where something is good or bad, right? And so intentions.
Right. Yeah, it's good or bad. It's not even good or bad. It's right or wrong.
Right or wrong, right? Yeah.
It's right or wrong. And because we started talking about academia, and one of the great things is we have more and more educated priests. Thank God. The problem is a lot of our priests are not just poorly educated, but mal-educated. I have a lot of friends, for example, who preach in the Greek Archdiocese, and it's somewhat distressing how few of them have read Aristotle. Or any of the ancient Greek literature, even in translation. The very things, by the way, that St. Basil says a young man should read. So we do tend to think in very abstract terms. And to come back to one of my favorite words these days, we don't think in prudential terms. And if you remember, we talked last time. Prudence asks, "What is the ultimate goal? Basically, who do I want to be at the end of my life? And then what's the next step or two along the way to that goal?" Instead, we adopt the method of the social sciences, which is we come up with an abstract set of propositions that result from a methodology, and then we try in a ham-handed fashion to apply that information to the situation, and that generally takes the form of getting people to conform to our abstract principles.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
It just causes resentment.
But it's not a new problem, come to find out. So St. John Chrysostom, he preaches against this. I'm reading his commentaries on 1st and 2nd Timothy. I'm reading them for Good Guys Wear Black. And he just went on he got into the soapbox about this in the last homily for the first
chapter. He does go on Jags.
He does, right? And I'm like, wow, was he looking at today's society? And you're like, no, people haven't changed, right? We are doing the same things over and over again, and yeah. So, all right. So this is a problem, and what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? This is that's a dangerous way to go, and it's not something that. Ideally, that would not be happening in the West. That should not be happening in the West. I can see how it happened. So Fedotoff, in his cultural history of Russian Orthodoxy, he describes how that kind of happened. That was part of the formation of the Russian Orthodox culture because of the sample of basically books of learning that came from the Roman Empire. What was there to learn, right? And they didn't get the whole corpus, much less Aristotle, right? They got a certain set, and it wasn't even a full set of patristics, and that had a huge, the condition at T0 has a huge effect on later trajectories. So, anyways, we can certainly recreate that. We can create an anti-science, anti-philosophy, thinking, and ironically, so I just did something weird, right? If we just rely on social sciences, we're using the West's wisdom against itself, right? And this is something that C.S. Lewis described, not just in The Abolition of Man, but in That Hideous Strength, right? The third of the Space Trilogy. And one of the saddest characters in that book, and I do recommend it, it's kind of fun, is the social scientist. You know, the one he's newlywed and he's just working his way up in academia, and he gets caught up because he doesn't have the discernment. He doesn't have the tools, right? And so he finds himself, once he realizes that, he acknowledges that he's wasted his life. He hasn't pursued the good. He's just pursued kind of the useful. And we're in a huge danger of that. And so this is coming into our church in a couple of ways, I think. One is through this, this secular education that has lost its mooring. And then another is the response. It's the other side of that coin, is the fundamentalist response. And we've got to avoid both of those Ascilla and Corinth, or whatever they are.
Yeah, chalk and cheese, whatever. Yeah, one of the things, because I have, we both have friends who object to the term fundamentalist. My preferred term at the moment is post-enlightenment reductionism. But this is important because this is as much a phenomena of the left as it is of the right. Whatever one thinks about the behavior to reduce oneself to the abstraction of sexual orientation, or to entertain the notion that one can, by fiat, change from male to female or female to male, is at least as suspect as imagining that Genesis talks about 7 24-hour days. These are both very narrow readings of human experience or the scriptures. But there is this tendency to reductionism, to reduce the person to just a few discrete characteristics. And we were talking beforehand when talking about your teens. Well, who am I? Well, you are this child loved by your mother and father. You are this person loved by God. And that lends itself to its own kinds of sentimentality, its own kinds of reductionism that lets us sort of soft focus. But if I really love you, then I really pay attention. And I don't just pay attention to the pleasant bits. I pay attention to the whole of you. To go back to Dionysius, because I'll speak for myself. My sins represent the deficiencies of goodness in my life, or they represent the way in which I'm out of balance. I'm not in harmony with God and with myself and with my neighbor. And if you really love me, you want the deficient good to be filled to overflowing, and you want the disharmony in my life to be brought into consonance. But that means you have to pay attention. Aquinas has this little section about how is it that God knows evil if God is all good, and Aquinas says God knows not evil, but he knows the good which is absent. So if I really love you, I need to know, and if I really know that you're loved by God, I need to know the good which is absent in your life, and then move to help you acquire that goodness.
Okay, and so I want to connect to some of the dots here. That's okay. What you mean by not being abstract. That sounded abstract, but it's not, because it's how can I love this person in front of me?
Right.
Okay. Well, for one, I need to recognize them.
Yeah, but to love you, to love the person in front of me, I have to know you as God knows you. And ideally that happens because I'm a saint. I'm not. So I need something, some standard, and that's scripture, and then the commentary on scripture, which is tradition. The scriptures help me to understand the person in front of me, but but the tradition helps me, understand Scripture correctly. Um, you know, for example, there was in online orthodoxy for a while a great fascination with the phrase "all our righteousness is as a filthy rag," and someone had chosen to translate it as a menstrual rag. And this was very popular in a small subsection of crazy orthodoxy online. Um, and this was being offensive for offensive sake, But they wholly lost the idea that the person is loved by God. That the fact that you are loved by God is the first and last word about your life. And I think, we need to remind people of that, is that sin never has the last word. It doesn't have the first word. Actually, sin has nothing to say. It just says it loudly. And it disguises itself, and I had posted that from the prologue this morning. Sin disguises itself with the clothes of goodness and virtue. I think one indication that I've gone off the track as a pastor is when I prefer the abstract to the concrete. The category to the individual. We don't like that word individual in orthodoxy, and I have engaged shamefully in those polemics myself. But properly understood, say in someone like Frederick Hayek, the economist, an individual is to talk about someone as an individual is to talk about the person who is free to embrace or not the life of the community. For Hayek, this is what individualism is. It's a theory of society. It says the individual is free to join or not different communities as conscience moves them. And this is what we are striving for. We are striving to be individuals in this sense. Free men and women who can embrace the gospel without reservation. Not because of who our parents were or because of social expectations, but because we have fallen in love with Jesus Christ. But again, that's all in that old moral language. But we don't have patience for it. Maybe this is an example. When I was a boy, I was born in 1960, back when children were fed sugar in vast quantities. So I grew up drinking high C orange drink. My first taste of orange juice was most distressing. I did not like orange juice. It didn't taste right. Of course, because it wasn't half sugar. I preferred the artificial to the real. And, high C was just so nice, and there was nothing in it. And our orange juice had pulp and seeds. Evidently, someone gave me a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice. It must have been my grandmother. But that was just awful experience, because it had stuff in it, and it wasn't sweet. It was bitter. And this is where we find ourselves.
Yeah. So do you have a few more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. Because
absolutely.
Yeah, and let's set the limit at 10 minutes. So if y'all can hang around for 10 more minutes, because I want to pick your brain on something. And we've talked about it on Good Guys Wear Black, but never we've already done the setup for it.
Yeah.
So when you are loving the individual, when you are loving the person before you, and as a pastor, you're guiding them into a deeper relationship with God. You're teaching them how to love. Right. You're teaching them how to know. And that's going to look different. Your conversation with each of those persons is going to be a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
Well, when you aggregate that, it starts getting messy, right? And so one of the things that can happen as a result is, self-selection into
Yeah.
cultures, right? And so what you can end up with in a single broader community is, for example, one parish that likes a certain kind of high C, right? That's what it looks
Mm-hmm.
like, right? And another
Yeah.
one that likes Mountain Dew, right? And hopefully both of the
Right.
pastors are trying to get them to like the orange juice, right? Or to move
Mm-hmm.
from milk to meat, whatever metaphor we want
Yeah.
to use.
Whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but they can get stuck, right? And,
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to the label because I can't remember the three words you gave me. So one of them might be known as a fundamentalist parish. We're going to
Right.
focus on the Masons, and we're going to focus on, the decadent America and all that, whatever the form
Right.
of that high C is. And then
Right.
you might have one that is known for being more liberal, where their Mountain Dew is, hey, we're going to find the good in everybody. We're not going to really focus on sin. We're going to, make sure that everybody knows that they are loved by God, right? And those can be starting points, right?
Yeah.
But how do those communities relate to each other? And what's the danger of being a pastor in the High C and the Mountain Dew parishes?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think one of the problems with those parishes relating, well, and when we say we relate to each other, we mean in a manner which is mutually affirming and supportive and loving, as opposed to relating to each other in a manner which is antagonistic, which is typically, I think, what happens. Um, one of the things that I've talked about in my own congregation, and I think it's applicable here, is you can be an extraordinarily good scientist, but a bad philosopher. And I think I think one of the real deficits that we have is that we have a lot of clergy who might be very good at theology, but they are very bad at philosophy. They haven't studied the nature of being, of being human, of being a member of a society or of a community. They haven't studied logic or epistemology. And so because they haven't taken that time to step back and reflect on being in a systematic fashion, they are, I think, more prone to being swept away by either their own passions or the passions of their respective parishes. Um, so over the years I've spent more and more time studying philosophy, and or philosophically oriented texts like Hayek and economics, for example. Um, because I need to reflect on those most basic things, those things which are most universal of what it is to be human. Um, so that's the first thing. But the second thing I think for the pastor, in a more immediate sense, is coffee hour. I know a lot of priests like to, social hour is their time to fellowship with the congregation, and it's a social time, and I appreciate that, and I do a little of that. But mostly, I stand in the corner and watch. Uh, I was in one parish where the parish council president came up to me. There'd been some problems there, and the council president said, "You're watching us. I've been watching you, and you watch us every week. You stand over in a corner and you watch us." I said, "Yeah, that's my job. My job is to watch you, is to see, who's on the margin, who are the groups. I have to watch you. I have to see how the community lives. I mean, I'm not a member. I tell my own parish, I'm not a member of the community. Um, I'm the priest. I represent the bishop, but I just always worry about priests who aren't lonely, honestly. But go ahead.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You can because here's the danger. If you become a member of that community, you are, in a broader sense, you're a part of the community, of course. But you're not
Yeah.
friends with anybody. You don't have that kind of social connection. You're the pastor. You're the pastor. You're overseeing. You're watching. Yeah. Beautiful. And
Yeah.
here's one of the lessons learned that I want to extract from what you just said. So
Okay.
one pastor has this group that they've watched and they've figured out, and they're providing this guidance, right? And it's, it looks like high C, and the other one's doing their thing. It's Mountain Dew because the culture's different and they need that, and you're going to move them towards something real,
Yeah.
right? The challenge, like you said, is when they meet, and when their leaders meet. That's what's going on Facebook. That's what's going on in social media. And
Yeah.
the labeling of other people, it only makes sense. Like, yeah, of course I'd be a terrible pastor in your circumstances, but if I were in your circumstances, I wouldn't be giving them Mountain Dew. I'd be giving them high C because I'm a pastor, right? The unwillingness to be charitable towards other pastors is just heartbreaking.
Right.
Instead we judge worst intent, and so we do come up with words like
Right.
liberal and fundamentalist. No, we shouldn't go to that. But on the other hand, it drives me crazy. It drives me crazy when priests they think that they are the pastors of these other people on social media, right? Mm-hmm. And so they judge bishops, they judge priests, and they give advice. Oh, this is the only advice that can work in your situation, right? Any other understanding is clearly, what's the word you used? Wrong, right?
Wrong.
It's just absolutely
Irrational.
wrong. There's no rational way that an Orthodox Christian would ever say anything but this thing, right? You're like, oh
Yeah.
man, I cannot stand being here.
Yeah, I have my own way of dealing with it, which yours is probably better. But I mean, to go back to studying philosophy, you have to study epistemology, and you study enough epistemology, you realize how difficult it is to know something with the kind of certitude that you want, at least when you're talking about concrete, practical matters. There are some things that we cannot bless, we cannot affirm, and these are summarized for us quite nicely in the Ten Commandments. I remember a couple of years ago I was talking to some people about politics and public policy especially, and I said, we're Orthodox Christians. There are three things we cannot support: abortion, same-sex marriage, and torture as a way to get a confession, because those were the three issues at the time. And someone said, "Well, that's it?" It's like, yeah, I mean, pretty much, as near as I can tell, those are the three issues that we can't affirm, can't support. But what do we do about them? Well, I have no idea. I can say that these are bad things, but how to work to do away with them. That's a great free space, and we're going to come from our own perspectives. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind as priests. If I hear of a parish or a brother priest who's communing a couple in a same-sex union, that's wrong. I mean, that's wrong. That's immoral. That is sinful. You can't do that. Because you're making a statement about the nature of the relationship, which is simply contrary to the gospel. But how you work with that couple for the course of time is a different and from my point of view, a more interesting question. As a pastor, I can't obviously support someone who's getting an abortion. Can't support that decision. That's an immoral decision. But how I respond to that person, how I work with that person, is a different question. And for me, this is a struggle because I've known women who've gone to get abortions, And at some point, I had to acknowledge the fact that however much I thought this was an immoral decision, a sinful decision, and it is a sinful decision, two things needed to be kept in mind. I have almost no ability to affect the outcome, to prevent that decision from being made, and I have to take into consideration, intention with regard not to the morality of the decision, but to the culpability or the freedom of the individual to make that decision. So, but this is true when we talk to our brother priests as well. Priests do things which, sometimes we have priests who support things which are fundamentally immoral. But we have to, the question of intention comes in as we're trying to talk to the person, which means I've got to understand my brother priest and what's his rationale, what is he thinking, what is he trying to accomplish.
And I've seen that, and social media is not set up for that. So it can be within a limited audience, within a trusted group, but as soon as that kind of nuance comes in, where there's actual pastoring going on, someone will come in and judge intent, and boom, the conversation's over.
And we go, and again, I go back to Aristotle. Do not expect from a science more precision than its object allows for. Social media is not the place, to try to pastor individuals, especially with highly emotional and contentious issues.
Okay, we got to wrap this up. So here's the challenge of us as pastors, is their experience of church has been that. That's been our witness. Not the pastoring, because it can't really take place on social media. Their experience of what clergy do is us boom, 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 boom.
But it can happen on social media, but it can only happen within narrow margins, or narrow parameters. And unfortunately, what I see with a lot of pastors, and I've been prone to this myself, though I've grown up basically. Pastors, adopt the stance of the pundit and make these broad, sweeping statements. I'll leave you with this because I know we got to go. But I was cleaning up the church a couple of weeks ago, and especially with just one liturgy a week and with only one person, the church doesn't really get dirty. So it's like suddenly I wake up, it's like, oh yeah, I really should clean up a little bit, because I don't really notice it because there's only one person. And so I came back during the week, and I'm emptying the censer, and I'm taking out the little bowl that the charcoal sits in, and actually I have a little bowl that I made out of aluminum foil because it went missing years ago, I guess. Anyway, I'm emptying out the charcoal, the old charcoal, and I'm thinking, this is my life now. This little tiny act, the whole of the liturgy depends upon me doing this little tiny thing. And as I sat back and I thought about it, I realized, well, this is the whole of the pastoral life, is that it is made up of very small, easily overlooked actions, for good or ill. So the question is, do I smile? Do I say thank you? Do I say please? Do I say to people, do this, or you might want to consider? Sometimes I realize that if I say you might want to consider, that's the equivalent of telling someone you don't have to do it. However, for other people, what you might want to consider, well, they'll change their lives immediately. It's like, oh my God, Father Gregory said I might want to consider something. So I've had to learn to say, some people I just have to say, do this.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
But our lives as pastors are made up of this collection of very small, easily overlooked actions. This is
Yeah.
why the church fathers didn't engage in systemic reform of the empire. It wasn't because they were indifferent to injustice, but because they knew that lasting change is made up of small actions. And I think, God forgive us. A lot of our brothers are not particularly interested in doing that. And some of it's because we have a lot of young priests, thank God. But I think a lot of it is because we have some immature priests who are really old enough to know better. Little tiny actions, and we can do those little tiny actions on Facebook. But not the big actions. So, but I'm sorry, I go on too long.
No,
But
that's perfect. Yeah, and it all ties together. Humility, love, small actions, focus on the person, listening. Yeah, it all comes together. Yeah, and it's our responsibility as you were saying earlier before we came on that I'm still a baby priest, and it's true. But we're responsible for training another generation to come after us, and the wisdom of the small, the gentle movement, the listening. This is a huge part, and you know we have to live it. That's how we teach it, is we live it. Well, Father Gregory, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your calm.
Oh, my pleasure, Father Anthony.
And your witness. So, those of you are YouTube listeners, watchers, next week we'll have 2 shows. On Monday, it'll be a weekend roundup, whatever comes into my fool head. And then on Tuesday, we're going to talk science and orthodoxy with Gail Wallachak, who's a no-kidding scientist and a no-kidding theologian, and a woman who prays and who loves. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think everyone will enjoy it. Gail is such a tremendous resource for us. So that's next week. And until then, Godspeed.